Welcome to the Mind Body Couple podcast.
I'm Tanner Murtaugh.
And I'm Anne Hampson.
This podcast is dedicated to helping you unlearn chronic pain and symptoms.
If you need support with your healing, you can book in for a consultation with one of our therapists at painpsychotherapy.ca.
Or purchase our online course at embodycommunity.com to access in-depth education, somatic practices, recovery tools, and an interactive community focused on healing. Links in the description of each episode. Hi, everyone.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back.
Welcome back. We have a very needed topic today.
Yeah, and one that's kind of been requested by some of you guys listening. So we thought it was important that we start with this topic today.
Yeah, we're going to talk about parenting while healing chronic pain and illness.
And we also want to note, though, that even if you don't have kids, you'll probably and hopefully get something from this podcast because demands and stressors in life always influence pain and symptoms. And this is an example of like demands and stressors.
Yeah. So if you don't have kids, just think about what aspects of work, social life, or other responsibilities are influencing your pain and symptoms.
But for the people that do have kids, we wrote this one for you.
Yeah. And about us, if you're new to the podcast, personally, I recovered from chronic pain, and we know my pain was neuroplastic in nature, which means that my body wasn't damaged. There was no disease, what was actually taking place is just I was in a chronic state of danger. And when I was healing, we didn't have kids. This was...
No, like your initial healing... Yes, we didn't have kids.
Yeah, that was 10 years ago. I've had some flares while having kids, though. And when we talk about neuroplastic pain and symptoms, it's when we're stuck in a state of danger in our brain and nervous system. And this really ties in with parenting. We have this image of parenting, like before you have kids, I think I had this too. You have this image of parenting, I'll be hanging out with my kids, we'll be relaxing, we'll be playing, we'll be having these good times, and all of that is true.
Yeah.
But we also know parenting is very hard.
Oh, yeah, but I relate to you, Tanner. So I used to have this similar kind of images. Like I remember when we were pregnant, actually, we bought like a baby bassinet, like most people do. And our cats, loved it. They would hang out in there. They thought it was for them. But that's all I would imagine of hanging out with my baby and the bassinet, just like the cats, having fun. And I didn't really know what I was getting into.
Yes, we didn't know. And me and Anne had very little exposure to having kids before we had kids.
Yeah, we didn't really know much about kids. I don't even know if we liked kids before.
Yeah. I don't know what.
We weren't kids.
But now we have 2 kids.
Yes.
Our daughter is almost 5. Coming up in a few weeks.
Yeah.
And our son is 7.
Yeah.
So we have a busy household, and we learned parenting is hard.
Yes.
But we also
right
know,
away.
Oh, yes. But we also know parenting while healing is hard.
Yes.
Or parenting after you've already recovered from neuroplastic pain and symptoms is also difficult.
Well, okay, so maybe let listeners know or refresh their memories, if they already know, of where you were at in your healing journey, kind of when we had kids or maybe when we got pregnant.
Yeah, so when we got pregnant with our son, I think I was healed. When I mean by healed, is I really didn't have chronic pain anymore.
Like it wasn't consistent?
Wasn't
or
consistent,
you still having
wasn't
some
daily.
Pain? Okay.
I would go months without having pain.
Okay.
Was doing quite well.
Yeah.
Little mini flares, maybe a few times a year. And I think I was probably 1.5 years, 2 years into healing.
Okay.
Something of that nature. And yeah, it was a difficult thing. Actually, when we had our son, my life was more laid back So I was working at a job that was pretty laid back. We didn't have a bunch of responsibility. Like we didn't own a house yet. I felt in a more laid back place.
Yeah.
So when we had our son, things were going pretty well. I'm going to share later in this podcast, like when we had our daughter, it was a different story. I was more struggling at that time. But we learned, parenting is difficult. Kids can be dysregulating when they're little babies, but as they get older, they have big emotions.
Yes.
Especially our kids. Me and Anne tend to be the sensitive type. So our kids tend to be the very sensitive type.
Well, and like back to this point, Tanner, that kids can be dysregulating. It can be really hard. And if you maybe hadn't recovered or hadn't been at that place when you had your son, what do you think that would have been like for you?
It would have been a lot more difficult for sure.
Right.
And I feel for people that are trying to heal, like, well, they have a child. And kids alone, I've seen that trigger someone's chronic pain and symptoms initially or worsen them.
Yeah.
And yeah, like kids can be dysregulating. With having kids comes like pressure and responsibility that we didn't really have insight to before.
Yeah.
You also have things like always feeling busy.
Yeah, constant busyness. I think that was one of the hardest adjustments for me. As you know, Tanner, I like some downtime in my life. Yeah. I need that downtime in my life. And it quickly, when we became parents, it's like that downtime wasn't there. There was always something to do. There was always busyness. There's always demands. And I've found that as a parent to be very stressful for me.
Yeah. And the other thing about parenting is it can become all-consuming.
Yes.
You start to lose aspects of yourself, your identity, your personal interests.
Well, and when we think about chronic pain or living with chronic pain, sometimes part of the healing work is reconnecting with your identity, is kind of reclaiming parts of yourself, is often for a lot of people slowing down. And so when we have these external pressures, so again, if you don't have kids, think these external demands on us, keeping us in this like busy, kind of intense state of being, that really is the opposite of that healing journey that might help us.
Exactly. And you also have, when people are parenting and have chronic pain and symptoms, often when I see it, I feel for people because this is a hard thing. And when I've had flares, I've felt this after we had kids, is there's like a pushing through. Like we push through our pain and symptoms to care for our kids. We can't always respond to nervous system cues, meet our needs. Like there's difficulties there too, where you're now taking care and raising this, this child or children. And so like naturally we want to push through to make sure we're good parents.
Yeah. And it can be like also a bit of a moral situation where it's like, well, I should push through, or I should do this, or I should be away. And sometimes when I've talked with people of like, okay, let's start slowing down. Let's see where we can kind of change things. That challenges the I should. And I think that can also happen in other areas like the workplace or with other family members, this idea of we should be a certain way. But actually, it's causing us more and more nervous system dysregulation.
And this is why parenting can trigger chronic pain and illness and perpetuate it. Because we can feel chronically stressed and we have an inability to meet our needs for different reasons.
Yeah.
And so our body starts to warn us that it's feeling in danger, that it's feeling in this state of survival.
Totally.
And it uses chronic pain and symptoms to cue us, like, hey, something doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
This is how our body speaks to us when it doesn't have words.
Well, and I can relate to that. So, as you know, Tanner, you'll see the uptake of my Tylenol taking, the more stressed I get. And that's because I can tend to get headaches. And so the more I'm kind of stressed or busy or feel like I'm pushing my limits, I can get headaches. And I kind of start taking Tylenol daily. And I very much know that's connected to that busyness and stress for sure. But it is that cue of like, hey, you need to tend to yourself here.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I'll feel like, well, I don't know how to do that because I have all these demands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those periods, I think the sicknesses, we talk about it a lot on this, but like when everyone in our house starts to get sick, Anne's Tylenol intake goes up.
Yeah, well, because it's stressful. And I know in those periods, and I'm sure many of you probably relate to this, of like when the household is getting sick, I have to push through.
Yeah. But I know you also, I give you credit here, like you do a lot of this work as well. Like you're tying in a lot of this work,
Totally.
self-care, creating safety. And so, you know, we do our best and we have a wealth of knowledge between the two of us to deal with our neuroplastic symptoms. You know, when our daughter was born, it was pretty chaotic. As we've shared last episode, you know, Anne had preeclampsia. And so as a result, her daughter was born very early. And it was a very different experience from when our son was born.
Oh, yeah. Like having second child when one child is already around.
Yeah.
It's not.
And we're in the NICU, so we're going to the hospital.
And it's the pandemic.
And it was the pandemic. Like our daughter was born, and like the day after was the first case of COVID in Alberta.
And I don't know if it's the first case, but it was like when they implemented shutdown here.
No, it was the first case of COVID in Alberta.
Yeah,
the
but
day
then they
after she was born.
implemented shutdown.
Yeah, very shortly after.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like, I was like, what are the odds? Like, so me and Anne weren't allowed to see our daughter together. I'm working full time, so I'm going to the hospital at 4 a.m.
I remember we had our son in childcare, but I pulled him out.
I know, so...
Because I was, like, very nervous about COVID and, like, what was going to happen and, like, in the childcare setting.
Yeah, so we had that going on. I was going to the NICU at 4 a.m., hanging out with our daughter for 2 hours, going to work.
Stressed just listening to the story back.
It was, and what happens is I started to get this, like, hip leg pain down my right leg.
Have you ever had hip and leg pain before?
It was...
Was it familiar?
Yeah, it was the same pain that I had many years prior when I recovered. So I knew it was neuroplastic.
Okay, like it was familiar enough. It was kind of similar because I think sometimes we can get other pains and that can really throw us.
Yeah.
But this was like, oh, my old friend is back. Yeah. When was the last time you had that kind of pain though?
You know, that pain poked its head up once in a while, but like it had, like this time around, like it lasted for 5 or 6 weeks.
Right.
Like this, and we've shared this on our podcast before, but this was my longest flare that I ever had last. And it made sense because there was so much danger that life was throwing us.
Yes.
That it was just like I was in chaos. I was highly anxious. And I was just going to say, could you have stopped that from happening? With all your knowledge, could you have stopped that with what was going on for you? I think to give to give context before that, like I just completed my master's. I wasn't doing that well. And partly because I had fallen back into perfectionism. So part of this was like, okay, there was these uncontrollable factors. But there's things that I could have controlled leading into that experience that I did not. Like I fell back into old patterns, and I don't blame myself for that. Like I fall into putting pressure on myself, being self-critical. So already going into that experience, I was dysregulated, and it was enough that it just pushed me over the top. And this is why I talk about with people the importance of maintaining the work after you've healed.
Ah, that's right. And so, because I like that example, Tanner, because it's like this stage was already being set before all of these kind of very uncontrollable
I
situations.
almost talk about this concept of like a buffer.
Yeah.
Like you need to maintain the work to maintain the buffer. Yes. So that when stressors are thrown at you, like we were dealing with, there's a buffer where like your nervous system is regulated enough that even if it gets dysregulated, symptoms don't get triggered.
But one thing I also want to say, sometimes we maintain and buffer as much as we can, but symptoms still very much get triggered because sometimes those stressors and those triggers are very much out of our control.
Yeah, sometimes life's going to throw us things and we just do our best. And so, you know, after my leg pain started, I really dove into the work. I started to create a lot of social safety breaks in my day. I think I went down to working 4 days a week instead of 5 at the time.
Right.
So I was making lifestyle changes. I was doing emotional work. I was regulating myself. Like I did a lot of work at that time to really dive into things, and it worked. Like within a few weeks of doing that, it faded off, and in the coming months after that, like my anxiety reduced significantly. Like it really was a wake up call. And this is the thing with parenting is we really need to maintain our healing. Everyone does, but like when you have kids in the mix, these little dysregulated kids that are going to throw you through a loop, it's especially important.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that we've learned is we really needed to do, like allow ourselves the space to maintain, and myself too. And so I know I mentioned those headaches, but I don't necessarily struggle with chronic pain. But I very much get very dysregulated, and it comes out in other ways if I'm not taking care of myself.
Mm-hmm. And so you talk about what we want to share at the end here, that give a message of hope, that healing or maintaining your healing is possible with kids, but it needs to look different.
Well, and so when you have somebody that comes to you, Tanner, that is at the beginning of their healing journey, they have kids already, like they're in the midst of, parenting. What kind of message do you share with them right away?
Well, the first thing that I'm working on pretty early on is building in practices to process emotions and regulate the nervous system. This can make a big difference. These can be tricky to prioritize when we have kids. And I've worked with people where, due to extenuating factors, like they just don't have the space.
Yes.
But I think sometimes, I'll just be blunt, we need to make the space.
Well, and I think, and I 100% relate to this. I think it can really feel like we don't have the space and we can't see where it is. But sometimes if we start to kind of think about it, we can carve it out or we can make it. Sometimes that is a compromise to something else, which is difficult.
Yeah.
But it's important to step back. Now, if you're listening to this and you don't have kids, but maybe you're relating to this to your workplace or something else, it's the same idea. And I think often if we have a stressful workplace, actually it very much is similar to this of like, there's demands on me all the time. There's no space to maybe slow down or take care of myself. But often it's finding that and making it too.
And it's prioritizing it.
Yeah.
Like it needs to be a priority. And I know that means maybe making some hard shifts or changes.
Yes.
But that's the reality. Like if we want to get better when we have these social factors that are creating a lot of danger, such as having kids and parenting, it needs to be a priority that you're working on processing your emotions and regulating your nervous system.
And that can be hard to do, especially again, if our mind or our moral compass is saying, no, like I put myself last, because this is a bit of shift of like, no, maybe we put ourselves first a bit.
Yeah. The other thing that is going to make this possible is creating social safety.
So what do you mean by social safety?
So this can be either the way you're living life, like your lifestyle, or just factors in your life. So for myself, like my friends are very busy and some of them live in different places of the world, but I'm making time each week. And when I was recovering from that leg pain, like I was making time with friends. I remember every second Friday or so, I'd go for a hot tub at my friend's house.
Yeah.
It was a lifestyle shift that created some safety.
And how did that impact maybe pain and symptoms or nervous system regulation for you?
Well, I think it was huge because it gave me time and space to hang out with my friends, to be outside of our family system.
Yeah.
And out of the chaos.
Yes.
And we were doing this back and forth, like trying to give each other breaks to maintain things that we also wanted to do in our life. And that was a way I was creating social safety. But it's also lifestyle. Like, when you have kids and you're parenting young kids especially, like work may need to look different.
Yeah.
That's it. Like I think it's easy for us to get wrapped into work, especially in a capitalistic society, that this is important. We need to achieve, we need to perform, we need to make more money. And I get those pressures. I don't blame anyone for falling into those. I've fallen into them.
Yeah.
But I think we need to take a bird's eye view here and be like, is this realistic?
Now, sometimes we don't have a choice. Like sometimes we don't have control over our work and we need that to make ends meet. But then sometimes then it's making shifts outside of work to really focus on that nervous system regulation.
And part of our work now We run two companies.
Yeah.
And I want to be clear, like, I feel a lot of pressure about that. And there's great benefits that running my companies have given me. So, like, I'm not denying that. I'm very privileged in lots of ways. But there's a lot of pressure of performing on this podcast, performing on YouTube, sharing my story with the world. Like, that's not easy stuff to do. And then on top of that, like, if I don't work, I don't get paid. I need to make sure enough clients come to see us. And that's hard stuff. And I've had to learn to adjust and have other parts of my life that aren't so pressureful, that I enjoy. Like, I make sure each day I do my yoga or my qigong or like I'm playing guitar, which is a great time.
Are you saying if you had all that pressure with work and then the pressure with family, there would be no room for almost pressure release?
Exactly. And so lifestyle needs to be shifted. And I don't want to sound hypocritical. I work a lot and I really enjoy my work, but I need to do it in a certain way.
And you've learned that, because I think for a long time, Tanner, and I know you talk about perfectionism a lot, but for a long time you fought that in a way of like, again, I must, fall into the demands and fall into the stress of it. And it's taken you a lot of learning to prioritize other things, which happens to be self-care or nervous system regulation or that time out, whether it's connected to the family or work or whatever that is.
And one thing we've mentioned that you're kind of talking about that has been vital for us, and I think there can be a lot of resistance with parents I've worked with, is taking breaks.
Yes, that's been the biggest thing for us is breaks from the beginning. And asking for those breaks, sometimes, and this is my experience and sometimes the experience of other mothers that I've worked with, but there's this idea of like, and at least I know for mothers, and again, I'm saying this is our experience, but that I'm speaking to, but sometimes there's this belief of, I'm the mom, I can't take a break.
Yeah.
I shouldn't take a break. And I've talked with a lot of people about changing that narrative and also advocating for yourself.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Like, it can be a bit gendered. I think mothers can feel it a lot more. But I've worked with fathers too, where they have this belief that outside of work, they need to be spending every moment of free time with their kids.
Right, because that's also another kind of way of thinking of like, I'm working, so now I must like monopolize on this time, which is also a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure, and it's not realistic for your nervous system.
Yes.
Like, it wasn't designed to just work and then always be around your kids. Like, that's...
Well, because let's be honest, and for some of us feel it more than others, but I feel it, being around my kids is work.
Yeah. And we love our kids. Don't get us wrong here. We're not saying that, but we're just trying to make the case that like breaks are key.
Well, that's right. We can't always be working.
Yeah. And me and Anne have a really good partnership around this. I think like we're taking each other.
It's taken us time to get there. Like we've had sometimes some rocky spaces, and both of us like desperately advocating for our needs, but we're both so dysregulated that we can't hear it.
Yeah, and I totally understand that we are in a very privileged position, so sometimes we have the capacity or the finances to do this.
Yeah.
But I do think taking breaks, it can take a little creativity based on your situation of what that looks like.
Yeah.
Like, I play my guitar. I don't have time to play guitar 3 hours a day, but I do it for 30 minutes, right? And we rent a horse for work. I want to be clear, but Casper the horse.
Yes.
And Anne also does equine therapy, so you're in Calgary, Alberta.
You're putting that in there right now, hey?
A little plug for Anne.
Reach out to us if you're interested in equine therapy.
She's the horse whisperer.
Oh my gosh, no.
I'm pumping you up.
Yeah, I'm not a horse whisperer.
You're tearing yourself down.
We're going on this weird segue.
You're tearing yourself down. I'm trying to pump you up here. But
the reason we brought up Casper the horse is over the years that I've been, working with him, he's been huge for my mental health and huge for that breakout. I've noticed when I'm not with him, my mental health actually starts to decline. And so, but that's been a really big pinpoint for me of like, actually, this is part of nervous system regulation for me, and I need to prioritize kind of having that time alone, away from Tanner, away from my kids, doing my own thing. And I know at the beginning we talked about interest, and sometimes with parenting we can lose things that matter to us. This for me has been a big part of like reclaiming interest for myself and identity.
The next thing that is going to help you heal when you have the demands of parenting is really assessing and making changes to what your home life looks like.
Yes.
What I see people do, and I get it because people love their kids, they want the best for their kids, but this is what it'll look like. They go to work, they pick their kids up, they rush them to 2 activities a night, 5 days a week. Like there's no downtime. And I really prioritize for people, like kids need to be shown that downtime's safe. Like it's okay to go home and do nothing.
Right. And nothing doesn't mean like watch TV. Like we're not advocating
No, but
that.
like play in your room, play with your toys. Our daughter's really into doing her art. Like I think sometimes in our society we prioritize so much productivity and busyness.
Yes.
And this is funneled down to our children.
Well, and it's funny because if we're actually wanting to learn to slow down, then maybe we all need to learn to slow down.
Yeah, like we need to teach our kids this. And I think we can reduce the pressures of parenting by giving ourselves slowness in how our home life functions.
Yeah.
And so don't get us wrong, our kids go to swimming. Our son's going to do some writing and reading classes right now. So there's nights that we're out, but usually one of us is home with the other kid having some downtime, right? Like there's a mixing up that's taking place on Sundays. We don't do much. We kind of hang out, Sunday from like 1 to 5, we might make some meals for the week, but our kids are playing and they're used to that now.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. Like I know for myself, one thing that I can't tolerate is I can't tolerate having a really busy Sunday. And then going to work for the rest of the week.
Okay. And sometimes that might be the compromise. So it's like, okay, I want all of this for my kid, but if I'm like pushing myself to the limit, it's not going to be helpful. And our example of like nights in or out, that might not work for you and your family. And you might be like, oh my God, I don't agree with that. And that totally makes sense. But it is finding then what works for you of like what keeps me regulated. And still kind of jives with my parenting values. And sometimes it is kind of reshuffling that a bit.
Yeah. And for this next point, I just want to, be clear. There are single parents out there. Yeah. And we're not in that situation. No. And I really feel for people because that's incredibly challenging. Yeah. Especially if people have limited support. But if you do have a partner or supports in your life, it's important to connect with them, to co-regulate, and to support each other. Yeah. This is a big problem that I see when I work with people where their partner's not really a safe person for various reasons. They're getting a lot of signals of danger from parenting, and they can feel very alone. Yes. And so like that co-regulation, our nervous system's feeding off one another, leading each other to safety. Yeah. And something that me and Anne are both therapists, so we're always thinking about this. Years back, I remember me and Anne went to some couples counseling before marriage. And the therapist was a bit blown away because they were like, I don't know if I've ever met a more honest couple. Like, we're just so bluntly honest with each other. Yeah. Which has caused some fights over the years.
Yeah, it's not always helpful.
But I think there's a lot of benefit there. Yeah. Because we know the other person's just being truthful. And the other person's going to tell us when, like, you're maxed out.
Well, and it's interesting that you mentioned couples counseling because through my work with people, I have, like, talked with people, whether they have children or not, and they've kind of gone the route of couples counseling, and it's been really helpful in terms of co-regulation and communication. And so I guess I want to put it out there that couples counseling can be super useful. And if we are feeling that we can't co-regulate and support each other with kids, that's another reason why couples counseling might be an avenue to explore.
The next point we want to talk about is really two things.
Yeah.
So 1-2 punch. Both important.
You just made that phrase up or something.
That's a phrase.
I've never heard that.
You're not in the boxing circles.
No.
Neither,
Are you?
Neither am I.
Okay, sorry. Okay, go ahead.
I'd be a terrible boxer.
Oh my God.
Anyways.
I'd lose immediately, but...
Wow, just have a little faith in me.
I
am like a really
like,
small...
have you guys seen Tanner? I'm sure some of you have.
I think on my videos, I wonder, because on my videos, can people tell how tall I am?
They know you're short.
Maybe they don't. Maybe in my videos, they're like, oh, Tanner's 7 feet tall.
No
Yeah,
one
probably
is
not.
thinking that. Anyways, go on.
I'm short. I'm 5'4".
And because of that, our children are short.
You're shorter than me.
Yeah, because of us, our children are short.
We do have some very small kids. Our son is like so skinny. Every time we go to the doctor, we're like so concerned, like that they think we're like not feeding him.
But they do think we are, which is good.
Our son, though, he doesn't prioritize food.
No.
All he prioritizes is fun.
Yeah,
so like,
well, that's fair.
Some kids love to eat. Our son could care less. Anyways, the next 1-2 punch point. Radical acceptance and self-compassion.
Yeah. So when we kind of talked about doing a podcast focused on like parenting and chronic pain, those are the biggest things that I think are important to keep in mind.
Yeah. We need to radically accept our situation sometimes.
Yes.
Like sometimes we can make changes, but sometimes the best we can do is radically accept it. And acceptance isn't approval. Like we don't need to approve of coming home to kids with big emotions and tantrums are being thrown, toys are being, like it's just a disaster. But like we don't have to approve of that. But sometimes we do just need to fully accept this is the situation right now that I'm in.
Yeah.
And after we do that, we also want to bring a lot of compassion, love, and care for ourselves.
Right.
And there's lots of ways to do that, but sometimes it's just the energy we have with ourselves.
Well, and I think an important piece to mention here is sometimes when pain and symptoms are high, we can't do as much as we wanted to do. And that will mean maybe not being exactly the parent that we want to be. But I think that's where radical acceptance and compassion need to come in.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes we can't show up the way we want.
Yeah.
And that's really difficult and can bring a lot of sadness to people. But you can really care for yourself, like whether you're still healing from chronic pain or symptoms or, you already healed, parenting or other factors in life, they can make life really difficult. Life isn't easy. We know that.
Yeah.
And these two principles can be really effective. And the last thing we just want to mention is, the goal here as you're learning to heal while parenting is really learning to feel safe in your body, even if your kids aren't regulated. I think that's a possibility. Like we can get there. We can learn to feel safe. We can learn to feel regulated even when our kids are dysregulated.
Yeah.
Sometimes better than others. It's not going to be perfect. But I've learned that over the years. I've learned better ways to feel regulated when my son's angry and throwing stuff.
And one thing I want to add there, that's taken time for you, Tanner. That's taken time and it's taken practice.
Yeah. So I hope this podcast was helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you for listening.
And we'll talk to you next week.
Talk to you next week. Thanks for listening. For more free content, check out the links for our YouTube channel, Instagram, and Facebook accounts in the episode description.
We wish you all healing.